The tax collector's footsteps echoed through the village. One day's earnings short. Why did this single moment mean the difference between keeping their home or losing everything they had built over generations? David's hands trembled as he counted the silver coins for the third time. Still not enough. The Roman tax assessment had arrived yesterday, higher than expected, due in full by sunset today. His wife Rachel watched from across their small stone house, grinding grain with steady, practiced motions. Their 8-year-old son Samuel slept fitfully on his mat, fever burning through his small body for the second day now. 3 crises, 1 family, 12 hours, until the tax collector returned. In first-century Palestine, a single day could determine a family's survival. Stay with us, because understanding how these families lived their days reveals why Jesus' presence among them meant the difference between despair and hope in a world balanced on the edge of survival. Before the rooster's call pierced the darkness, Rachel was already awake. Fever radiated from Samuel's small body beside her. She pressed her palm to his forehead. Still hot, but no worse than yesterday. A blessing, however small. She rose silently, leaving David and their son sleeping, and stepped into the pre-dawn world where Palestine stirred to life. The village well waited at the end of familiar stone paths. Other women were already there, their movements efficient and practiced. Water jars balanced on shoulders, quiet conversations about sick children, grain stores, husband's work. A neighbor approached, concern creasing her weathered face. "How is Samuel this morning?" "The same." "But David," Rachel's voice dropped lower. "The tax demand. We're short." The woman's expression darkened. Everyone knew what happened to families who couldn't pay Roman taxes. Property seized, possessions sold, sometimes family members taken as slaves to cover debts. How much? 3 denarii, the equivalent of 3 days' wages for a skilled worker. Might as well be 30 for a family already living at the edge of subsistence. The neighbor squeezed Rachel's shoulder, but offered no false comfort. They both knew the mathematics of survival too well. Rachel filled her jar and began the return journey. As the sky showed the first gray hints of coming dawn, David would wake soon and begin his own desperate calculations. How much grain could they sell? Which tools might bring enough silver at market? What favors could he call in from neighbors who had their own families to protect? By the time she crossed their threshold, David was stirring. He sat up slowly, running calloused hands through his dark hair. The weight of the day ahead showed in his posture before he even opened his eyes fully. "Samuel," he asked quietly, fevers holding steady. "I found mint leaves yesterday that helped with the breathing." David nodded, accepting this small mercy. He stood and moved where their meager possessions were stored in wall niches. Every item would be evaluated today. The extra grinding stone, his father's wooden mallet, the brass oil lamp that had been Rachel's dowry gift. "We have the wheat," Rachel offered. 2 full storage jars. "Seed grain," David replied. "If we sell that?" He didn't finish the sentence. Without seed grain, there would be no crop next season. No crop meant slow starvation, watching their son waste away over months, instead of losing their home in a single day. Neither choice offered real hope. Samuel stirred on his sleeping mat, his breathing quick and shallow. David knelt beside his son, noting the flush in the boy's cheeks, the way his small hands curled against his chest. In a world without physicians or medicine, fever in children was often a death sentence. Parents could only wait, pray, and hope their child's constitution proved stronger than whatever sickness had taken hold. "We'll find a way," David said, though his voice carried more determination than conviction. Outside, the village was fully awake now. As the sun climbed toward the eastern hills, voices carried through narrow streets as men set out for fields, workshops, and fishing boats. Women stoked cooking fires, and began the endless cycle of bread making that sustained Palestinian families. Children who weren't sick helped with animals, carried water, and learned the work they would inherit. David gathered his carpenter's tools: adze, chisel, measuring string, small saw. Each implement represented years of savings and careful maintenance. In his trade, broken tools meant no work, and no work meant no food. He had promised to complete a door frame for Isaac the potter today, work that would pay enough to put food on his family's table, but nowhere near enough to satisfy Roman tax collectors. "I'll check on Samuel every hour," Rachel promised, as he prepared to leave. David paused at their doorway, looking back at his wife and sleeping son. The morning light, streaming through their single window, illuminated everything they had built together. Modest, simple, precious beyond measure. By evening, it might all belong to Rome. The walk to Isaac's workshop took him through the heart of their village, past the synagogue, where he had learned carpentry from his father, past the market square, where Rachel sold vegetables from their small garden, past houses, where neighbors faced their own daily struggles with crops, debts, sickness, and the endless pressure of Roman occupation. Isaac was already working when David arrived, shaping clay on his wheel with the fluid motions of decades of practice. The older man looked up as David unpacked his tools, noting the tension in the younger man's face. "The tax assessment," Isaac guessed. David nodded grimly. Word traveled fast in small villages, where everyone's business was everyone's concern. "How short?" "3 denarii." Isaac's hands paused on the clay. He had his own family to protect, his own taxes to pay. But he had also watched David grow from apprentice to master craftsman, had seen him marry Rachel in the same synagogue, had celebrated Samuel's birth 8 years ago, finished the door frame. "I'll pay you now instead of when it's complete." It was a generous offer, but still not enough to bridge the gap between David's savings and Rome's demands. David began measuring and cutting wood, his movements automatic after years of practice. The familiar rhythm of carpentry provided temporary distraction from calculations that led nowhere good. As the sun climbed higher, heat began building in the workshop. David's tunic grew damp with sweat as he shaped joints and fitted boards. The door frame took shape slowly, solid, functional, built to last. In normal times, such work brought satisfaction. Today it felt like marking time before disaster. A commotion in the street interrupted his concentration. Voices raised in excitement and concern. David set down his tools and stepped outside to see a small crowd gathering around a local farmer, known for his quick temper and quicker tongue. "They're saying the tax collectors are taking household goods now," the man announced loudly. "Not just grain and livestock, blankets, cooking pots, anything they can sell in Jerusalem markets." The news sent ripples of anxiety through the growing crowd. Bad enough to lose surplus crops or animals, but cooking pots, blankets, those were the basic tools of survival, irreplaceable for families with no money to purchase new ones. David felt his stomach clench. Their household goods wouldn't fetch much silver, but they represented the difference between basic comfort and absolute destitution. He returned to his work with new urgency, but mathematics remained ruthless. Isaac's payment, plus their tiny savings, plus the value of everything they owned, still fell short of what Rome demanded. Near midday, when the Palestinian sun reached its merciless peak and all sensible work ceased, a boy appeared in the workshop doorway, young messenger, with the formal bearing that suggested important news. "Rachel sent me. She says come quickly. Samuel is asking for you." David's hands stilled on the wood he was shaping. A sick child, asking for his father, could mean many things: improvement, decline, or simply the restless confusion that accompanied fever. He looked at Isaac, who nodded understanding. "Go, the door frame will wait." The walk home stretched interminably, through streets baked empty by midday heat. Stone walls radiated warmth, and even shade provided little relief from the sun's assault. David forced himself not to run, not to panic, but his pace quickened with each step. He found Rachel sitting beside Samuel's sleeping mat, bathing the boy's forehead with cool water from their precious supply. Samuel's eyes were open but unfocused, his skin flushed and hot to the touch. "He woke asking for you," Rachel explained softly. "Said he had a dream about the carpenter shop." David knelt beside his son, noting the boy's labored breathing, the way fever had stolen the robust health that normally characterized childhood. Samuel's eyes found his father's face and managed a weak smile. "Papa, I dreamed you were building something very tall, taller than our house." "What was I building, son?" "A ladder to reach the clouds, even through fever." Samuel maintained the imagination that had always delighted his parents. David smoothed his son's damp hair, feeling helpless against the sickness that no amount of carpentry skill could fix. "Rest now. I'll stay until you sleep." But Samuel's eyes remained open, bright with fever and something else, concern that seemed far too mature for an 8-year-old. "Papa, why is Mama sad?" "She thinks I don't see, but I do." David exchanged glances with Rachel over their son's head. Children noticed everything, understood more than adults assumed. "Mama worries about you being sick. That's what mothers do. But it's something else too. Something about the tax man." The directness of Samuel's observation struck David powerfully. Their son was growing up in a world where 8-year-olds understood tax collectors, where children learned to fear Roman authority before they could properly read scripture. "We'll manage," David said. The same words he had spoken to Rachel that morning, carrying the same mixture of determination and uncertainty. Samuel nodded solemnly, then closed his eyes. His breathing gradually deepened as fever-induced exhaustion reclaimed him. David remained kneeling beside the sleeping mat, watching the slight rise and fall of his son's chest, feeling the weight of responsibilities he couldn't fulfill with hammer and chisel. As the afternoon heat reached its brutal peak, and even the hardiest workers sought shelter, David returned to Isaac's workshop. The thick stone walls provided blessed relief from the sun's assault. Isaac worked steadily at his wheel, hands shaping clay into vessels that would hold grain, oil, water, the basic necessities that sustained life in every Palestinian household. Other men had gathered in the workshop's shade, seeking relief from heat that made outdoor work impossible. Conversation was desultory, focused mainly on the oppressive weather and the universal concern about tax assessments that seemed higher every year. "They're taking household goods now," reported a baker, confirming the morning's rumors. "Saw it myself in a village near Magdala," Isaac replied grimly. "Left families with nothing but the clothes they wore." "What's the point?" demanded a young fisherman. "Take away cooking pots and blankets. You've got people who can't survive to pay future taxes." "Rome doesn't think about future taxes," Isaac answered. "They think about this year's tribute to Caesar. Next year is next year's problem." David focused on his doorframe as the conversation continued around him, but every word increased his sense of impending disaster. As shadows began lengthening and the sun's angle allowed for resumed activity, David completed the doorframe. The work was excellent. Precise joints, smooth finish, built to withstand decades of daily use. Isaac examined it carefully, running experienced hands over surfaces and connections. "Beautiful work, as always." He counted out silver coins into David's palm. More than the project was strictly worth, David realized. Isaac's quiet way of helping without making the assistance obvious or embarrassing. "Thank you." Isaac nodded, understanding. No further words were necessary between men who had known each other for decades, who understood the mathematics of survival in occupied Palestine. David gathered his tools and prepared for the evening walk home. The village was beginning its transition from the day's heat toward evening's relief. Women emerged from houses to prepare cooking fires. Children appeared in doorways after spending the hottest hours indoors. Men returned from fields and workshops, faces marked by fatigue and the perpetual anxiety that characterized Palestinian life. He found Rachel sitting beside Samuel's sleeping mat, the boy's fever finally broken. Samuel's breathing was deeper, more natural, his skin cool to the touch. The crisis that had begun their day was resolving just as another crisis approached its climax. He asked for water an hour ago. Rachel reported with obvious relief, drank nearly a full cup. David knelt beside his son, noting the improvement immediately. Samuel's eyes opened at his father's touch, clearer now than they had been all day. "Papa, I'm hungry." Words that would normally bring parental joy carried additional weight today. Samuel's recovery meant one crisis was passing, but hunger reminded them of the resources they were about to lose. Rachel had arranged their possessions on the floor while David was working, the brass lamp catching afternoon light from their window, the extra grinding stone that had been her mother's pride, copper bowls that had served countless meals, a silver bracelet David had given her after Samuel's birth. "This is what we can sell," she said simply. David picked up each item, weighing it in his hands, estimating its market value. Together, they might fetch half what they needed. Combined with Isaac's payment and their tiny savings, still not enough to satisfy Roman demands. Samuel struggled to sit up, his recovery remarkable but incomplete. "Papa, what's wrong? Why are you looking at Mama's lamp like that?" David sat beside his son, searching for words that would be honest without being frightening. "We need to sell some things to pay taxes to the Romans." "Even Mama's lamp?" "Even Mama's lamp." Samuel considered this with the seriousness that sick children sometimes develop, as if fever had burned away childhood's ability to ignore adult concerns. "Will we still be a family?" The question struck David more powerfully than any Roman tax demand. His son understood instinctively what mattered most, not possessions or property, or even financial security, but the bonds that held families together through every crisis. "We will always be a family," David answered with absolute conviction. "Romans can take our things, but they can't take us away from each other." As evening light faded toward the oil lamp hour when families gathered for their main meal, David set out for the market square with the items they had chosen to sell. Other families were making similar desperate calculations, turning possessions into silver that might or might not satisfy tax collectors who would return with the setting sun. The marketplace buzzed with quiet desperation. Vendors who usually sold food and necessities found themselves competing with families selling precious possessions. Prices fell as supply exceeded demand, making bad situations worse for those who had no choice but to accept whatever silver they could get. David sold Rachel's brass lamp to a merchant who recognized quality workmanship. The grinding stone went to a young couple starting their first household. The copper bowls found buyers among neighbors who understood they were helping friends survive crisis. When the transactions were complete, David counted his coins carefully, still short. Not by much, perhaps 1 denarius, but Roman mathematics allowed no margin for almost enough. He returned home as cooking fires began appearing throughout the village, and families prepared for evening meals. Rachel was feeding Samuel thin broth, made from their remaining grain stores. The boy's color had returned, his appetite a sign that the fever had truly broken. "How much?" Rachel asked quietly, while Samuel concentrated on eating. "Close, very close, but not enough." They sat in silence as evening light faded from their single window. Around them, the village settled into nighttime routines, families gathering for meals, children being called indoors, the gradual quieting that marked the end of another day in Palestine. A knock at their door interrupted the peaceful moment. David rose, expecting to find a neighbor, or perhaps a late customer for his carpentry services. Instead, he found Marcus, a local farmer, holding a small leather pouch. "Isaac told me about your situation," Marcus said without preamble. "This isn't charity, it's investment. When your situation improves, you'll remember who helped when it mattered." David accepted the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. Exactly what they needed to make up their shortfall. He realized without counting. "Marcus, say nothing. We're neighbors. Neighbors help each other survive." The tax collector arrived just as full darkness settled over the village. David met him at their door, with the exact amount demanded, counted out in silver that represented everything they had accumulated over years of careful work and saving. The Roman official was efficient and impersonal, checking the coins against his written records, making note of the payment in his official ledger. To him, this was routine business. To David's family, it was survival purchased at enormous cost. After the tax collector departed, David returned to find Rachel and Samuel sitting by their small oil lamp, not the brass one from her dowry, but a simple clay vessel that cast adequate light for their evening together. "Will we be all right, Papa?" Samuel asked, his child's intuition sensing the weight of what had transpired. David looked around their modest home, now stripped of most possessions, but still containing everything that truly mattered. His wife, whose strength had carried them through the day's crisis. His son, recovered from fever and whole again. The roof that sheltered them. The walls that protected them. The community of neighbors, who had proven that survival in Palestine depended on mutual support more than individual wealth. "We will be all right," he answered, and for the first time that day, believed it completely. This was the world where Jesus walked among people who understood that daily bread was never guaranteed, that forgiveness of debts meant freedom from slavery, that healing could save entire families from ruin. His teachings about trust, community, and God's provision weren't abstract theology, but practical wisdom for people who lived every day, balanced between hope and disaster. The son of a carpenter had grown up in households like David's, where parents made impossible choices between seed grain and tax payments, where children's fevers could mean family catastrophe, where survival depended on neighbors, helping neighbors through crises no individual family could face alone. When Jesus later taught about not worrying about tomorrow, about seeking God's kingdom first, about believers supporting one another, he spoke to people who knew exactly how precarious daily life could be. And if this glimpse into an ordinary day in Jesus' world has deepened your understanding of the practical realities that gave weight to his teachings about provision, community, and trust, we invite you to continue exploring with us the historical foundations that illuminate Scripture and strengthen faith. Until our next journey into the past, may these ancient examples of resilience inspire your own daily walk with God.